What happens when a decorated airline pilot, a man trusted with hundreds of lives, lets his mask of professionalism slip for a single horrifying moment? On a transatlantic flight, in the hushed luxury of first class, a celebrated black surgeon is called a monkey by the captain himself. But this pilot made one fatal mistake. He had no idea the woman he just insulted was married to the man who owned the entire airline, and her husband was sitting right next to her. Stay tuned to Dark Stories, because this tale of instant karma will leave you speechless. What follows isn't just a story of instant dismissal. It's a story of devastating karma, a web of conspiracy, and a reckoning that would shake an entire corporation to its core. Stay with us on Dark Stories as we unravel a story so shocking, you'll question everything you think you know about power, prejudice, and the price of a single word. Buckle up, because this drama at 30,000 feet is about to take off. The air in the Orion Air First Class Celestial Suite was a carefully curated whisper of luxury. It smelled of rich leather, expensive perfume, and the faintest hint of Krug champagne, which was being poured with silent reverence by a flight attendant named Chloe. For Dr. Serafina Dubois, the scent was a familiar backdrop to a life she and her husband, Alexander Sterling, had meticulously built. At 38, Serafina was one of the world's leading cardiothoracic surgeons, her hands responsible for mending the most broken of hearts. Her skin, the color of rich mahogany, seemed to absorb the soft ambient light of the cabin, and her eyes, dark and intelligent, held a universe of both compassion and unyielding strength. She was flying to London to deliver the keynote address at the World Health Innovators Summit, a monumental achievement, the culmination of years of relentless work. Alexander wouldn't have missed it for the world. He sat opposite her, his tall frame relaxed in the plush cream-colored seat. Alexander Sterling, the boy genius who'd inherited a struggling regional airline from his father and transformed it into Orion Air, the undisputed king of luxury air travel. His silver-streaked dark hair and piercing blue eyes were the subject of many a magazine cover. But to Serafina, he was just Alex, the man who still made her laugh until she cried and who held her with a tenderness that belied his formidable reputation in the boardroom. To Dr. Dubois, Alexander said, raising his crystal flute, the woman who's about to make the world's most brilliant medical minds feel like they need to go back to school. Serafina smiled, the gesture reaching her eyes and making them sparkle. And to Mr. Sterling, the man who makes sure I get there without a single layover. She clinked her glass against his. Their love was a quiet, unshakable force, a sanctuary in a world that often felt loud and chaotic. The flight, OA 101 from New York to London, was their flagship route, a showcase of Orion's obsession with perfection. The suites were private cocoons, complete with closing doors, fully flat beds made up with fret linens, and a Michelin-starred menu. It was Alexander's creation, his answer to the soulless cattle car experience of modern air travel. It was also, on this particular evening, about to become the stage for a drama he could have never scripted. The first hint of discord came from the pilot's voice over the intercom, Captain Finnegan Ollie. The name sounded sturdy, reliable, like someone you'd want at the helm of a 400-ton aircraft. His voice, however, was laced with an almost theatrical bravado. He welcomed the esteemed guests of Flight 101 with a flourish that felt more like a performance than a professional announcement. He certainly enjoys the sound of his own voice, Serafina murmured, taking a sip of her champagne. Alexander chuckled, a low, rumbling sound. Finn's an old-timer, been with the airline since my father's days. Flown more miles than any other pilot in the fleet. His record is flawless. He paused, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Though his ego could probably achieve liftoff without the help of 4 Rolls-Royce engines. An hour into the flight, as the coast of North America disappeared beneath a blanket of clouds, a minor inconvenience arose. The intricate ambient lighting system in Serafina's suite began to flicker erratically, casting strobing shadows across her face. It was a small thing, a glitch in the complex machinery of luxury, but it was jarring. She politely pointed it out to Chloe, the young flight attendant, who immediately looked flustered. "I'm so sorry, Dr. Dubois." "Let me reset it from the main panel," Chloe said, her voice a nervous flutter. She returned a few minutes later, her expression even more distressed. "Ma'am, I'm afraid the reset isn't working. It seems to be a hardware issue with the control unit. We can try to move you to another suite, but we are completely full in first." It's really no problem, Serafina said, her voice calm and reassuring. She could see the young woman was on the verge of panic. I can just turn it off completely. I'd rather have no light than a disco ball. Chloe's relief was palpable. But just as she was about to apologize again, a figure appeared at the entrance to their suite. It was Captain Ollie. He was a man in his late 50s with a weathered face, a shock of thick white hair, and a frame that was more wiry than imposing. He carried himself with an air of unassailable authority. Having some trouble back here, he asked, his voice a low drawl that didn't quite match his grandiloquent PA announcements. His eyes, a pale washed-out blue, swept over the suite, lingering for a moment too long on Serafina. Captain, we have it under control, Chloe said quickly, stepping forward as if to shield Serafina from his gaze. Ollie ignored her. He looked directly at Serafina. The girls tell me your light is on the fritz. He used the word girls to refer to the flight attendants, a subtle but grating dismissal of their professionalism. It's a minor issue, Captain. It's been resolved, Alexander interjected, his voice polite but firm. He didn't like the way Ollie was looking at his wife. The pilot finally turned his attention to Alexander, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. He knew who Alexander Sterling was. Of course, everyone at Orion Air knew their CEO, but he seemed to relish the opportunity to assert his own authority, the captain's authority, which on an aircraft in flight was absolute. Mr. Sterling, a pleasure to have you aboard, Ollie said, his tone shifting to one of feigned deference. I like to personally ensure our most valued customers are comfortable. It's a matter of professional pride. He then turned back to Serafina, a smirk playing on his lips. So, the little lady's having problems with the buttons? The condescension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Serafina felt a familiar, weary tightening in her chest. It was the kind of microaggression she'd dealt with her entire life, the subtle questioning of her intelligence, the patronizing tone, the assumption that she was somehow less capable. She kept her expression neutral, her voice steady. The control unit seems to have a fault, Captain. Your flight attendant was handling it beautifully. Ollie let out a short, dismissive laugh. A fault, or just user error? He leaned into the suite, his presence filling the small space. He reached for the control panel, his large, veiny hand brushing past Serafina's arm. She flinched, pulling back instinctively. I assure you, I know how to operate a light switch, she said, her voice now edged with ice. The pilot's smirk widened. He fiddled with the panel for a moment, the lights continuing their frantic dance. He seemed to be enjoying the spectacle, the small moment of power. Well, these newfangled gadgets can be tricky. He looked from the flickering light to Serafina's face, and then, in a low voice, almost a mutter, but intended to be heard, he delivered the word that would shatter the calm of the gilded cage. Can't have the monkey getting scared of a few flashing lights, can we? The word hung in the air, a vile, poisonous thing. The silence that followed was absolute, a vacuum that sucked all the air out of the suite. Chloe, the flight attendant, froze, her face draining of all color. Her mouth opened slightly as if to say something, but no sound came out. The couple in the adjacent suite, who had been murmuring quietly, fell silent. Serafina felt as though she'd been struck. The blow wasn't physical, but it was visceral, a sharp, searing pain that radiated from her core. For a split second, the world seemed to tilt on its axis. The luxurious cabin, the soft leather, the champagne, it all melted away, replaced by a raw, ugly reality. She was Dr. Serafina Dubois, a titan in her field, a woman of immense grace and intellect. But in that moment, to this man, she was nothing more than a racist caricature, a monkey. She looked at Ollie, her eyes locking with his. She saw no remorse in their pale blue depths, only a flicker of cruel satisfaction. He had said it, and he meant it. And then she looked at her husband. Alexander Sterling had not moved. He sat perfectly still, his body rigid, his face a mask of stone. But his eyes were on fire. The piercing blue had turned into a glacial storm, a tempest of pure, unadulterated fury. He slowly, deliberately placed his champagne flute on the polished wood console. The small click of crystal on wood was the only sound in the suffocating silence. It sounded like a death knell. The silence in the first-class cabin stretched for what felt like an eternity. It was a heavy, charged silence, thick with the unspoken horror of what had just transpired. Captain Ali seemed to realize, a fraction too late, the magnitude of his transgression. The smug smirk on his face faltered, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty as he finally registered the storm gathering in Alexander Sterling's eyes. Serafina remained composed, a mask of stoic dignity etched onto her face. Inside, however, a maelstrom of emotions was raging. The initial shock was giving way to a deep, familiar ache, the exhaustion of a lifetime spent navigating a world that, despite her achievements, still saw her color before it saw her humanity. The slur itself was crude, a relic of a bygone era of overt bigotry, but its power to wound was timeless. It was designed to dehumanize, to reduce her to something subhuman, and for a fleeting moment, it had succeeded in making her feel small. But then she felt Alexander's hand cover hers. His touch was a silent promise, a grounding force in the turbulent air. She squeezed back, a gesture of silent gratitude. They were a team, and the captain had just declared war on the wrong team. Alexander rose from his seat. He didn't stand up quickly. He unfolded his 6 feet 3 inches frame with a slow, deliberate grace that was far more intimidating than any sudden movement. He adjusted the cuffs of his bespoke Seville row shirt, his movements precise and controlled. He was no longer the relaxed, doting husband. He was Alexander Sterling, the CEO of Orion Air, and his kingdom had been violated. He stepped out of the suite, standing face to face with Captain Ali. The two men were a study in contrasts: Alexander, the picture of modern, sharp-edged power, and Ali, a relic of an older, cruder time, now looking increasingly like a cornered animal. Captain Ali, Alexander began, his voice dangerously quiet. Every passenger in the front cabin, and even some in the rows behind, were now craning their necks, their attention fully captivated by the unfolding drama. "I believe I misheard you. Would you mind repeating what you just said to my wife?" Ali's face, already ruddy, turned a shade darker. He started to bluster, the arrogance returning as a defense mechanism. I was just making a joke. It was just a bit of hangar talk. No harm intended." "A joke?" Alexander's voice dropped another octave, becoming a lethal whisper that cut through the cabin's hum. "You think reducing a black woman, a distinguished surgeon, to a racist trope is a joke? You think that's hangar talk? We tolerate at Orion Air?" Chloe, the flight attendant, finally found her voice, though it trembled. "Mr. Sterling, I can confirm what the captain said." Her eyes darted towards Ali, a mixture of fear and defiance in them. Alexander gave her a slight nod of acknowledgement, his focus never leaving the pilot. "I see. So, it wasn't a joke. It was a statement of your beliefs. A glimpse into the real Finnegan Ali." Ali's bravado began to crumble. He could see his career, his pension, his entire life flashing before his eyes. He tried to backtrack, to salvage the unsalvageable. "Look, Sterling, Mr. Sterling, I apologize. I've been flying for 40 years. I'm from a different generation. Things were different." "A different generation?" Alexander took a step closer, forcing Ali to take an involuntary step back. "Let me tell you about the generation I'm from, Captain. It's a generation where we don't tolerate bigotry. Not in our company, not on our aircraft, not for a single second." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. He then turned slightly, addressing the entire first-class cabin, his voice now ringing with authority. "Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Alexander Sterling, and I am the Chief Executive Officer of Orion Air. I want to apologize unreservedly for the despicable behavior you have just witnessed from one of our employees. Orion Air has a zero-tolerance policy for racism, discrimination, and any form of hate speech. There are no exceptions. Not for a baggage handler, not for a flight attendant, and certainly not for the captain of this aircraft." He turned back to Ali, whose face was now ashen. The pilot looked like a man who had just seen a ghost. "Captain Finnegan Ali," Alexander said, his voice cold and final, "consider your employment with Orion Air terminated. Effective immediately." A collective gasp swept through the cabin, a termination in midair. It was unheard of. You can't do that, Ali stammered, a desperate edge to his voice. I'm the captain of this plane. You have no authority. My authority, Alexander cut him off sharply, comes from the fact that I own this plane and the company you just disgraced. First Officer Williams, he called out, his voice projecting towards the cockpit, you are now in command of this aircraft. As your first official duty as acting captain, I want you to contact our ground control at Heathrow. Inform them that upon landing, Captain Ali is to be met by security and escorted off the premises. He is not to set foot on Orion property ever again. From the cockpit, a young, clear voice responded over the intercom. Understood, Mr. Sterling. The finality of it was stunning. Ali stood there, utterly defeated. The bluster, the arrogance, the lifetime of unearned authority had evaporated in a matter of seconds. He was just a man, stripped of his power, his dignity, and his livelihood, all because of one ugly word. Alexander turned his back on the now ex-captain and walked back to his suite. He gently closed the door, shutting out the stares of the other passengers. He sat down opposite Serafina, the fury in his eyes softening as he looked at her. Are you all right? He asked, his voice now filled with concern. Serafina nodded slowly, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness, but of a complex mix of hurt, anger, and a profound sense of love for the man in front of her. He had not hesitated. He had not made excuses. He had acted decisively, not just as a CEO, but as her husband, her protector. I'm all right, she said, her voice a little shaky. Thank you, Alex. He took her hand again, his thumb stroking the back of her palm. No one gets to talk to you like that, Seffi. No one. The rest of the flight was a blur. The news of the mid-air firing spread through the plane like wildfire. The cabin crew, led by a newly confident Chloe, were exceptionally attentive, their professionalism a stark contrast to their former captain's behavior. Upon landing at Heathrow, as promised, two stern-faced security guards were waiting at the jet bridge. They escorted a pale and silent Finnegan Ali away, his pilot's hat clutched in his hand like a useless relic. The story, however, was far from over. A passenger in the suite across from them, a tech entrepreneur with a large social media following, had discreetly recorded the entire exchange on his phone. By the time Serafina and Alexander had cleared customs, the video was already going viral. The headline was explosive, Orion Air CEO fires racist pilot mid-flight after he insults his black wife. The world was about to know the name Finnegan Ali, and for him, the fall from grace was just beginning. The video hit the internet with the force of a hurricane. It was raw, shaky, and utterly compelling. It captured everything: Ali's condescending smirk, the vile slur hanging in the air, Alexander's cold fury, and the shocking on-the-spot firing. Within hours, it had been viewed millions of times. #OrionAirCO and #FiredMidFlight were trending worldwide. The public reaction was a tidal wave of outrage and admiration: outrage at Ali's blatant racism and admiration for Alexander's swift and decisive action. News outlets from CNN to the BBC picked up the story. Orion Air's PR department, which Alexander had alerted from the plane, issued a formal statement confirming the incident and reiterating the company's commitment to diversity and inclusion. The statement, penned by Alexander himself, was unequivocal: hate has no place at 30,000 feet or anywhere else. For Finnegan Ali, the public fallout was a brutal, relentless assault. His face was plastered across every news site and tabloid. He was doxxed, his address and personal details leaked online. He was branded the racist pilot, a scarlet letter he would carry for the rest of his life. The pilots' union, after reviewing the evidence, issued a statement condemning his actions and refusing to support him. His career, a source of immense pride for 40 years, was not just over, it was annihilated. He retreated to his modest suburban home in Surrey, a bitter, broken man. The phone rang incessantly with calls from reporters and death threats. He became a prisoner in his own home, the curtains drawn, the world outside a hostile, unforgiving place. His wife, a quiet woman who had stood by him for decades, looked at him with a mixture of pity and revulsion. His children, grown and with families of their own, were ashamed. In his solitude, Ali's bitterness festered and grew. He didn't see his actions as a moral failing. He saw himself as a victim of political correctness gone mad, a victim of a world that had changed too fast, and most of all, a victim of Alexander Sterling. He obsessed over the incident, replaying it in his mind, convincing himself that he had been set up, that Sterling had used him to score points, to look like a hero. The thought of Sterling and his black wife living in their world of luxury and power filled him with a venomous rage. Meanwhile, in London, Serafina and Alexander were trying to find a semblance of normalcy. The World Health Innovators Summit was a resounding success. Serafina's keynote address on the future of minimally invasive cardiac surgery was met with a standing ovation. She was brilliant, poised, and inspiring. But the incident on the plane cast a long shadow. She was no longer just Dr. Dubois, the celebrated surgeon. She was now also the woman from the viral video, a symbol of resilience in the face of racism. She handled the attention with her usual grace, but privately, the wound was still raw. The slur had dredged up painful memories of her childhood, of being the only black girl in an all-white school, of the subtle and not-so-subtle slights she had endured on her journey to the top. Alexander was her rock, a constant source of support and love. But he also felt a deep sense of guilt. It was his airline, his employee, who had hurt her. "This can't just be about firing one man," he said to her one evening as they sat in the penthouse suite of their London hotel, the city lights twinkling below. "This is a symptom of a deeper problem. I need to know if we have other Finnegan Alice hiding in plain sight at Orient Air." He was true to his word. The day after they returned to New York, he launched a full-scale internal investigation. He hired an outside firm, a renowned risk and compliance consultancy, to conduct a top-to-bottom review of Orient Air's culture, hiring practices, and diversity training programs. He wanted to root out any systemic issues that might have allowed a man like Ali to thrive for so long. The investigation was led by a sharp, tenacious woman named Penelope Penny Croft. Penny was a former investigative journalist who had made a name for herself exposing corporate corruption. She had a keen eye for detail and a healthy skepticism of corporate PR. She was exactly what Alexander was looking for. Penny and her team began their work immediately, interviewing employees at every level of the company, from baggage handlers to senior executives. They reviewed personnel files, training manuals, and internal communications. What they began to uncover was unsettling. While Orient Air's official policies were exemplary, the culture on the ground was a different story. Particularly among the senior pilots, a generation of men who had come up in a less diverse, more hierarchical era, there was a palpable sense of resentment towards the company's new direction. They saw the emphasis on diversity and inclusion as a threat, a dilution of their long-held privileges. They referred to the new generation of female and minority pilots with dismissive nicknames. They complained about the PC police in HR. Finnegan Ali, it turned out, was not an outlier. He was a product of this culture. His personnel file was a testament to this. It was filled with glowing performance reviews and commendations for his flying skills. But there were also several red flags that had been ignored or dismissed: minor complaints from female flight attendants about his condescending attitude, a written warning from a few years back for making an inappropriate joke during a training session. Nothing serious enough to warrant dismissal, but a pattern of behavior that, in hindsight, was a clear warning sign. As Penny dug deeper, she stumbled upon something more disturbing. She found a series of anonymous posts on an online forum for airline pilots, a forum known for its right-wing, anti-immigrant rhetoric. The posts, which she was able to trace back to an IP address linked to Ali, were filled with racist and sexist vitriol. He complained about affirmative action hires in the cockpit. He mocked the company's diversity initiatives, and he spoke with particular venom about Alexander Sterling and his trophy wife. But there was one post, from a few weeks before the fateful flight, that sent a chill down Penny's spine. "The Silver Spoon CEO needs to be taught a lesson," the post read. "He and his pet need to be brought down a peg. A little turbulence is coming his way. Stay tuned." It wasn't just the ranting of a disgruntled bigot. It was a threat. It implied forethought, a plan. Penny realized she was onto something much bigger than a single racist incident. This wasn't just about the unraveling of one man. It was about the unraveling of a conspiracy. The hard karma that was coming wasn't just for Finnegan Ali. It was for something far more sinister lurking in the shadows of Orion. Pennycroft felt a familiar thrill, the same electric current that had coursed through her veins when she was a journalist on the cusp of a major story. The anonymous forum post was the key. A little turbulence is coming his way. It was too specific, too premeditated. This wasn't a spontaneous eruption of bigotry. It was a planned attack. She presented her initial findings to Alexander in his sprawling, minimalist office overlooking the Manhattan skyline. The view was breathtaking, a panorama of power and ambition, but the atmosphere inside the room was tense. Alexander listened intently, his face grim, his hands steepled under his chin as Penny laid out the evidence. "So, you're saying Ali's outburst wasn't random?" Alexander said, his voice low and measured. "I'm saying it was the opening salvo in a coordinated campaign," Penny replied, pushing a file across the vast mahogany desk. "I believe Ali was a pawn, a willing one, but a pawn nonetheless. He was encouraged, perhaps even coached, to create a scene." "To what end?" Alexander asked, his eyes narrowing. "To damage the company's reputation, to hurt me?" "Both," Penny said. "And to hurt Dr. Dubois." "The attack was personal, Alexander." "The language Ali used, it was designed to inflict maximum pain. They wanted to humiliate you by humiliating your wife in the most public way possible." A cold, hard anger settled in Alexander's chest. The thought of someone deliberately targeting Serafina, using her as a weapon against him, was infuriating. "Who are they?" "That's the million-dollar question," Penny admitted. "The forum posts are anonymous, routed through layers of encryption. But Ali must have been communicating with them. If he was a pawn, there has to be a puppet master." Alexander leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. Who in his world harbored this level of hatred? He had rivals, of course, the airline industry was a cutthroat business. But this felt different. This was venomous, personal. It smelled of internal rot. His thoughts immediately turned to the old guard, the executives and board members from his father's era, whom he had gradually replaced with a more forward-thinking team. Many had left with golden handshakes, but some had departed with a bitter taste in their mouths, resentful of the young upstart who had dismantled their comfortable, homogeneous world. "I want you to dig deeper, Penny," Alexander said, his voice hard as steel. "I want every email, every text message, every phone record from Ali's devices for the past 6 months. I don't care what it takes or what it costs. Find me the puppet master." While Penny and her team of digital forensics experts got to work cracking Ali's encrypted communications, the disgraced pilot himself was sinking deeper into a pit of despair and paranoia. His initial rage had curdled into a kind of desperate self-pity. The media storm had died down, but his life was in ruins. He was a pariah in his community. His savings were dwindling. The threat of legal action from Orion Air for breach of contract and reputational damage loomed over him. One evening, fueled by cheap whiskey and a burning sense of injustice, he made a fateful decision. He decided to fight back. He contacted a journalist from a notorious online tabloid, a man known for his sensationalist, conspiracy theory-laden articles. Ali, in his twisted mind, was about to tell his side of the story. The resulting article was a masterpiece of fabrication and victim blaming. Ali claimed he was the victim of a honey trap, that Serafina had provoked him, that Alexander Sterling was a tyrant who used his power to crush anyone who disagreed with him. He even hinted at a dark secret behind Orion's gleaming facade. The article was filled with racist dog whistles and barely veiled threats. It was a desperate, pathetic attempt to reclaim the narrative, but it had an unintended consequence. It gave Pennycroft the breakthrough she needed. In the article, Ali mentioned a fellow patriot within Orion who had warned him about Sterling's agenda. It was a small detail, a throwaway line in a sea of lies. But to Penny, it was a flashing red light. It confirmed her theory of a conspiracy, and it gave her a new lead. Her team, working around the clock, finally managed to decrypt a series of messages on Ali's laptop. They were from an encrypted messaging app, a ghost-to-ghost communication that left no trace. But the digital forensics team were experts. They found fragments, remnants of conversations that, when pieced together, painted a chilling picture. The messages were from a single anonymous contact, Icarus. Icarus had been feeding Ali's paranoia for months, stroking his ego, validating his prejudices. Icarus was the one who had suggested that Ali make a stand on his next flight with the Sterlings. Icarus had promised him financial support and a new job at a rival airline if things went south. "They want to replace us all with their kind," one of Icarus' messages read. "It's time for the real men of the sky to fight back." The final piece of the puzzle fell into place when Penny's team cross-referenced the timing of the messages with the location data from Ali's phone. Several of the messages had been sent when Ali was at a specific location, a private, members-only cigar lounge in Mayfair, London, a place known as a discreet watering hole for the city's old money elite. Penny pulled up the membership list for the lounge. Her eyes scanned the names, a list of bankers, lawyers, and corporate titans. And then she saw it, a name that made her blood run cold. Julian Croft, no relation to her, a cruel irony of fate. Julian Croft was a senior member of the Orion Air Board, a holdover from Alexander's father's time, a man who had been a vocal critic of Alexander's modernizing agenda, who had fought him on every diversity initiative, who had once sneered in a board meeting that Orion Air was becoming too woke for its own good. A man who had a reputation for being a ruthless, behind-the-scenes operator. Penny now had her puppet master. Icarus, the mythical figure who flew too close to the sun, was about to come crashing down to Earth. The shadow network was about to be exposed to the harsh light of day. And the karma that was coming for Julian Croft was going to be biblical. Julian Croft was the embodiment of old-world privilege, a man in his late 60s with a mane of perfectly coiffed silver hair, a wardrobe of bespoke suits, and a face that seemed permanently set in a state of smug condescension. He moved through the world with the unshakable confidence of someone who had never been told no. He was a serpent in a Savile Row suit, his venom hidden behind a veneer of charm and corporate jargon. He had been on the Orion Air Board for 30 years, a close friend and confidant of Alexander's father. He saw the airline not as a business, but as his personal fiefdom, a bastion of the old boy club mentality he cherished. When Alexander took over and started implementing his vision of a modern, inclusive, global brand, Julian saw it as a personal attack. He saw Alexander's marriage to Serafina, a brilliant, powerful black woman, as the ultimate betrayal of his father's legacy. His hatred was a quiet, corrosive thing. He worked in the shadows, using his influence to sow discord, to undermine Alexander's authority, to create a culture of resentment among the old guard. He was Icarus, a name he had chosen for its tragic irony. He believed he was flying towards the sun of righteousness to save his beloved airline from the darkness of progress. He never imagined he would be the one to get burned. Penny Croft delivered the bombshell to Alexander in a sealed file labeled Icarus. Inside was a mountain of irrefutable evidence, the decrypted messages, the location data, financial records showing secret payments from a shell corporation controlled by Julian to an offshore account belonging to Finnegan Ali. There was even a sworn affidavit from the journalist Ali had spoken to, who, facing legal pressure from Orion, had agreed to cooperate in exchange for immunity. Alexander read through the file, his expression hardening with each page. The betrayal was staggering. This wasn't a business rival. This was a man he had known his entire life, a man who had been a guest in his home, who had pretended to be a mentor and a friend. He targeted Sefi, Alexander said, his voice a low growl. He used her to get to me. He underestimated both of you, Penny said. He thought Ali's stunt would create a PR nightmare, that the board would lose confidence in you. He never dreamed you would fire him on the spot and turn the narrative in your favor. He never dreamed we would find him. The stage was set for the final confrontation. It wasn't going to be a quiet chat in Alexander's office. This required a bigger stage, a public execution. Alexander called an emergency meeting of the Orion Air Board of Directors. The stated purpose was to review the final report of the internal investigation into the Ali incident. Every board member was required to attend in person. Julian Croft arrived at the Orion headquarters, a self-satisfied smirk on his face. He believed the report would be a whitewash, a corporate exercise in damage control. He was about to have the surprise of his life. The boardroom was a cathedral of corporate power, a long, polished table surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city. Alexander stood at the head of the table, flanked by Penny Croft and the company's chief legal counsel. Serafina was also there, seated slightly behind Alexander, a silent, powerful presence. Her attendance was a surprise to everyone, including Julian. "Thank you all for coming," Alexander began, his voice calm and steady. "As you know, we recently concluded a thorough investigation into the incident involving former Captain Finnegan Ali. The findings of that investigation are disturbing." He let the word hang in the air. Julian shifted in his seat, a flicker of unease in his eyes. "The investigation confirmed that Captain Ali's racist attack on my wife was not a spontaneous act," Alexander continued, his eyes scanning the faces of the board members. "It was a premeditated, coordinated attack on this company and on my family. It was part of a conspiracy orchestrated by someone in this very room." A wave of shock rippled through the boardroom. The members looked at each other, their expressions a mixture of confusion and disbelief. Julian Croft's face, however, had turned a pasty white. The smugness was gone, replaced by a dawning horror. "The conspiracy was masterminded by an individual using the code name Icarus," Alexander said, his gaze finally locking onto Julian. "An individual who used anonymous messaging apps to groom and manipulate a disgruntled employee, an individual who paid that employee to create a racist incident in order to damage this company's reputation and undermine its leadership." He paused, letting the silence stretch. Then he delivered the final blow. "That individual is Julian Croft." He projected the decrypted messages onto the large screen at the end of the room. The vile, racist, conspiratorial words of Icarus filled the screen for all to see. The financial records followed, tracing the flow of money from Julian's shell company to Ali. The boardroom erupted in chaos. The other members stared at Julian in stunned revulsion. He sat frozen in his chair, his face a mask of disbelief. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. "Julian," Alexander said, his voice now filled with a cold, righteous anger. "For 30 years, you have been a cancer in this company. You have poisoned our culture with your bigotry and your resentment. You have conspired to destroy everything I have built. And you used my wife, a woman whose integrity and brilliance you could never hope to comprehend, as a pawn in your pathetic little game." He walked around the table until he was standing directly behind Julian's chair. "The board will now vote on your immediate removal for cause," Alexander announced. "But that's just the beginning. The evidence we have gathered has been turned over to the authorities. You will be facing federal charges for conspiracy, wire fraud, and witness tampering. The karma you so richly deserve, Julian, is just getting started." Julian finally found his voice, a desperate, strangled whisper. "Alexander, please." Alexander looked down at him with utter contempt. "You are a disgrace to this company, to this board, and to my father's memory. Security will now escort you from the building." 2 security guards entered the room and flanked Julian, who seemed to have aged 20 years in as many minutes. As they led him away, a broken, defeated man, his eyes met Serafina's. He expected to see triumph or hatred. But what he saw was far worse. He saw pity, the pity of a queen for a fool who had dared to challenge her throne and had lost everything in the process. The serpent had been defanged. The shadow network had been exposed. But the real work, the work of healing the wounds and rebuilding a culture of trust, was just beginning. The fall of Julian Croft wasn't merely a headline. It was a seismic event that sent tremors through the foundations of the old corporate world. It wasn't the clean, swift execution Alexander had staged in the boardroom that defined his ultimate fate, but the slow, grinding machinery of justice that followed. Julian, stripped of his bespoke armor and club memberships, found himself in a sterile, glass-walled room with a court-appointed lawyer who looked at him not with awe, but with weary resignation. The charges were a litany of his hubris: conspiracy to commit wire fraud, securities fraud for attempting to manipulate Orion Air's stock price through scandal, and witness tampering. The serpent, defanged and caged, could only stare at his own reflection in the polished table, no longer seeing a master of the universe, but a pathetic old man who had mistaken his prejudice for principle. His karma wasn't a lightning bolt from the heavens. It was the cold, unblinking, fluorescent light of a legal deposition, the endless pages of evidence, and the dawning, soul-crushing realization that the world he had built his identity on no longer existed, and he had authored its demolition himself. Finnegan Ollie, the blustering foot soldier, met a similar, albeit less lofty, end. His patriotic stand had earned him a supporting role in a federal indictment. The money from Julian had tainted him, transforming him from a pitiable bigot into a paid conspirator. His union abandoned him. His pension was forfeited, and his name became a verb in the industry. To Ollie was to self-destruct with such spectacular, bigoted ignorance that you took down a whole conspiracy with you. His hard karma was the quiet, gnawing obscurity that followed, the silence of a phone that never rang, the averted gazes of former colleagues in the supermarket, and the lonely nights with a bottle of whiskey, haunted not by guilt, but by the ghost of his own inflated self-importance. For Alexander and Serafina, victory felt less like a celebration and more like the draining aftermath of a necessary war. The exposure of the conspiracy wasn't a clean slate. It was the diagnosis of a cancer they now had to eradicate. In the quiet of their New York penthouse, with the city lights spread beneath them like a conquered kingdom, a heavy silence often settled between them. One evening, Alexander stood by the vast window, watching the distant lights of planes on their final approach to JFK. "I was blind, Seffi," he murmured, his reflection a ghostly figure against the night sky. "All this time, I was so proud of what I was building, the luxury, the brand, the future of travel. But I never looked deep enough into the foundations. I inherited the house from my father, and I put a beautiful new facade on it, but the rot was in the walls all along. Julian, he was part of those walls, and I never saw it." His guilt was palpable. He had protected her in the moment, but he felt he had failed to protect her from the institution that bore his own name. Serafina came to stand beside him, her presence a warm, grounding force. She had spent the last weeks deflecting interview requests and politely declining offers to become the face of various anti-racism campaigns. She was Dr. Du Bois, a surgeon. Her life was in the sterile, focused world of the operating theater, in the intricate dance of mending a failing heart. The idea of becoming a corporate icon, a symbol, felt like an ill-fitting garment. "This isn't your burden to carry alone, Alex," she said softly. "And it's not mine to carry for the world." "But they see you that way," he countered, turning to face her. "I've seen the emails, the messages from our employees, a young baggage handler in Atlanta, a flight attendant in Singapore, a junior pilot here in New York. All people of color. They don't just see you as my wife. They see you as a champion. They feel seen because of you." That was the turning point. The thought of those unseen, unheard individuals who had likely endured their own Ollie moments in silence resonated with the part of her that had chosen medicine, the drive to heal. Perhaps, she realized, a corporation's culture could be treated like a patient. It could be diagnosed, dissected, and, with a skilled and steady hand, meticulously repaired. "All right," she said, a new resolve hardening her voice. "If we're going to do this, we're not just patching the wound. We're performing open-heart surgery." And so, the Phoenix Agenda was born. It was a name Serafina herself had coined, a direct challenge to the tragic myth of Icarus. This wasn't about flying too close to the sun. It was about rising from the ashes of a fiery, painful truth. Alexander's first move was to send a clear message that the old ways were dead. He didn't just fire the handful of managers who had ignored Ali's prior conduct. He dismantled the entire pilot review system, which had been based on seniority and subjective captain's discretion. In its place, he instituted a rigorous 360-degree review process, where pilots were also evaluated by their first officers and the cabin crew they worked with. The howls of protest from the old guard were immediate, with cries of mutiny and ruining morale. Alexander faced them down in a tense meeting. "The morale of a bigot," he stated, his voice ringing with cold fury, "is not a metric I am interested in tracking." The centerpiece of the agenda, however, was the active bystander and cultural competency program. It was mandatory for every single employee, from the boardroom to the tarmac. Serafina, drawing on her medical background, helped design the curriculum. It wasn't a typical, boring HR seminar. It was immersive, intense, and uncomfortable. They used real-life scenarios, many drawn from anonymous submissions by employees. In one session, a group of senior male pilots had to role-play a scenario where a female co-pilot's expertise was being questioned by an air traffic controller. They fumbled, their initial responses ranging from awkward silence to overly aggressive pushback. The facilitator, a sharp-witted organizational psychologist, guided them, forcing them to understand the perspective of their female colleague, to learn the language of effective allyship. It was painful and humbling, but it was working. The culture was shifting, one awkward, essential conversation at a time. Serafina took the helm of the new Independent Ethics and Diversity Council. It was no ceremonial post. Her council was granted unprecedented power and independent budget, the authority to launch its own investigations, and the ability to make binding disciplinary recommendations. Her first act was to review the company's hiring data. She discovered a clear pattern of bias in the final interview stage for pilots and senior management. Her council, working with data scientists, implemented a new blind stage in the process. Resumes were scrubbed of names and identifying details, and the initial technical interviews were conducted via text-based simulators. The result was a dramatic increase in the diversity of the candidate pool that made it to the final rounds. Her new role was demanding. There were days she would leave a grueling 12-hour surgery, her body aching, and go straight to a 3-hour council meeting, dissecting complex legal documents and grilling a department head over retention statistics. She was a surgeon of bodies and now a surgeon of culture. The work was exhausting, but it was vital. She was ensuring that the heart of Orion, so recently shocked back to life, would beat with a stronger, more inclusive rhythm. A year passed. The scandal faded from the headlines, replaced by stories of Orion Air's remarkable and profitable turnaround. The Phoenix Agenda became a Harvard Business School case study on how to transform corporate crisis into cultural revolution. Serafina and Alexander were on a flight to Italy, a long-delayed anniversary trip. As they settled into their suite, a woman in a crisp captain's uniform appeared at their door. She was young, perhaps in her mid-30s, with a warm, confident smile and kind eyes. "Dr. Dubois, Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice clear and steady. "I'm Captain Ava Rasta. I just wanted to welcome you aboard. It's an honor to be flying you today." "The honor is all ours, Captain," Alexander said, smiling. Ava's gaze lingered on Serafina for a moment, a look of profound respect in her eyes. "Dr. Dubois," she said, her professional demeanor softening slightly. "I was a first officer in the fleet last year. I nearly quit. I didn't think there was a path forward for me here." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "What you did, the stand you took, and the work you've done since, it changed everything. You have no idea what it meant to people like me. Thank you." Tears pricked at Serafina's eyes. She simply nodded, her throat tight with emotion. As the plane began its powerful ascent, banking gracefully over the Atlantic, Serafina looked out the window at the endless blue horizon. The scar from that day would never completely disappear. It was a part of her story now, a part of the airline's story. But she thought of the scars she left on her patients' chests, the faint silver lines that mapped the mending of a broken heart. They weren't marks of weakness, but symbols of survival. They were proof that something had been broken, confronted, and healed. It was a testament to the fact that the human heart, and perhaps even the heart of a company, could be made stronger in the very places where it had been broken. The sky remade and reclaimed stretched out before her, full of limitless, breathtaking possibility. And so, a single hateful word, meant to demean and destroy, became the catalyst for a revolution. The story of Serafina Dubois and Alexander Sterling is a powerful reminder that while racism and prejudice still exist, they can be defeated. It shows that true power isn't just about wealth or status. It's about the courage to stand up for what's right, the strength to turn a moment of pain into a movement for change, and the unwavering belief that one person's voice can change the world. The karma that found the pilot and the corrupt board member wasn't magic. It was the natural consequence of their own hatred, brought to light by people who refused to stay silent. Their story is a testament to the fact that justice, though sometimes delayed, is a force to be reckoned with. What did you think of this incredible story of real-life karma? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, please hit that like button, share it with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe to Dark Stories for more unforgettable tales of drama, justice, and the human spirit. Thank you for watching.